The alien diplomat arrived on Earth with a sense of curiosity and caution. His species, known for their advanced technology and peaceful ways, had never encountered a civilization quite like humanity. He had heard stories, of course, rumors and whispers about Earth's inhabitants, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would find. As his ship touched down, the first thing he noticed was the overwhelming presence of military force. Hundreds of ships lined the skies, their engines humming as they hovered, each one a monument to human technology. There were no signs of war, no visible conflict, yet the presence of so much power left an unsettling impression. He was escorted through the bustling streets of Earth's capital, his mind racing with questions. This was not the planet he had imagined. Where were the struggling nations, the divided peoples? The Earth he saw was unified, strong, and ready. As the diplomat moved through the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every corner, every building seemed to hold some hidden truth that humanity had yet to reveal. His eyes scanned the skyline, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Massive structures that could withstand any assault towered above him, while the ground below was dotted with strange, futuristic vehicles. Humanity was not as weak as he had been told. When he finally arrived at the meeting hall, the diplomat was greeted by the Earth's leaders. A group of humans, each one with a demeanor that matched the strength of their civilization, stood waiting. Their eyes were steady, unflinching, and there was a calm in their movements that spoke of years of preparation. He had been briefed about their leaders, of course, but nothing in his studies had prepared him for the presence of the humans before him. They did not smile or greet him warmly, as he had expected. Instead, they looked at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, as though they had been expecting him for a long time. The diplomat took his seat, his mind still racing. He had come to Earth to discuss trade, to form alliances, but now there was a question he couldn't ignore. He had to know, how powerful was humanity? What kind of force did they possess? The reports he had received spoke of a young civilization, one still developing in many ways, yet everything he had seen told him a different story. The humans were not just surviving. They were thriving. They were ready for something greater, something more. But what? What did they really have? He cleared his throat and finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with unspoken questions. I've seen your cities, your ships, and your military presence. But tell me, how powerful is Earth? What kind of firepower do you truly possess? The question hung in the air like a weight, and for a moment, the humans exchanged silent glances. The diplomat couldn't tell what they were thinking. Were they hiding something? Or were they just as confused as he was about the true strength of their own world? He expected an answer, something concrete, something he could report back to his people. But instead, the room fell into a strange silence. One of the leaders, a woman with eyes as sharp as a blade, spoke first. Our power is not something you can simply quantify, she said, her voice calm yet carrying a weight that made the diplomat sit up straighter. You've seen our technology, you've seen our cities, but you have not seen what we are truly capable of. The diplomat blinked, trying to make sense of her words. This was not what he had expected. The humans weren't boasting, but there was something in her tone that suggested she was holding back, deliberately keeping the truth from him. Why? Was humanity afraid to reveal their strength, or was there something they didn't want him to know? Then tell me, the diplomat pressed. What do you have? How powerful are you? The human leaders exchanged more glances, their expressions unreadable. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, one of them, a man with graying hair and a scar that ran across his cheek, stood up. His eyes locked with the diplomat's, and for the first time, the diplomat saw a flicker of something dangerous in his gaze. It wasn't anger, nor was it fear. It was something much more unsettling. It was the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of, and knew the consequences of revealing it. Some things are better left unseen, the man said slowly, his voice low and steady. You've only seen what we allow you to see. But understand this, diplomat, Humanity is not a species to be underestimated. We may not show our full hand today, but rest assured, we have more power than you could imagine. The diplomat felt a chill run down his spine. The way the man spoke, so calm, so assured, made him realize that perhaps he had misjudged humanity. He had come here expecting weakness, expecting a species that could be easily manipulated or controlled. But instead, he was meeting with a species that was holding its cards close to its chest. It was unnerving, to say the least. Still, the diplomat pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. "Then show me," he said. "Show me what you are capable of." The human leaders exchanged another glance, and the woman who had spoken earlier stood up. "We are not ready to show you everything," she said softly, "but we will give you a glimpse, just a glimpse, of what lies beneath the surface." The diplomat leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. What was she talking about? What could humanity possibly have that was so powerful, so dangerous, that they would only show a glimpse of it? The woman nodded to the man with the scar, who left the room without a word. The others remained silent, their eyes focused on the diplomat as if waiting for his reaction. The tension in the room thickened, and for the first time, the diplomat felt the weight of his own ignorance. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it in the air. Something big, something powerful, was about to unfold. When the man with the scar returned, he was carrying a small device in his hands. It was a sleek, metallic object that seemed to hum with energy. He placed it on the table in front of the diplomat and stepped back, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. "Take a look," the man said, his voice quieter now. "This is just one of many." The diplomat hesitated, his mind racing. What was this? Was this some kind of weapon? What did it do? He reached out slowly, feeling the weight of the device in his hands. As soon as his fingers made contact with it, the room seemed to hum with energy. The device began to glow faintly, and for a moment, the diplomat felt a strange sense of power radiating from it. He looked up at the humans, his eyes wide with surprise. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling with awe. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what their technology could do. "This," she said softly, "is just a taste. And if you dare to press any further, you'll find that humanity's power is far beyond anything you've ever encountered." The diplomat's heart skipped a beat. He had asked the question, but now he wasn't sure if he really wanted to know the answer. The room felt colder, the tension thicker. The humans were not just powerful, they were dangerous. He had underestimated them. And now, he wasn't sure if there was any way to undo that mistake. As he sat there, staring at the glowing device, one thought echoed through his mind. Humanity was not what he had expected. And what came next would change everything. "Some things are better left unseen," the man said slowly, his voice low and steady. "You've only seen what we allow you to see. But understand this, diplomat. Humanity is not a species to be underestimated. We may not show our full hand today, but rest assured, we have more power than you could imagine." The diplomat felt a chill run down his spine. The way the man spoke, so calm, so assured, made him realize that perhaps he had misjudged humanity. He had come here expecting weakness, expecting a species that could be easily manipulated or controlled. But instead, he was meeting with a species that was holding its cards close to its chest. It was unnerving, to say the least. Still, the diplomat pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. "Then show me," he said. "Show me what you are capable of." The human leaders exchanged another glance, and the woman who had spoken earlier stood up. "We are not ready to show you everything," she said softly, "but we will give you a glimpse, just a glimpse, of what lies beneath the surface." The diplomat leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. What was she talking about? What could humanity possibly have that was so powerful, so dangerous, that they would only show a glimpse of it? The woman nodded to the man with the scar, who left the room without a word. The others remained silent, their eyes focused on the diplomat as if waiting for his reaction. The tension in the room thickened, and for the first time, the diplomat felt the weight of his own ignorance. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it in the air. Something big, something powerful, was about to unfold. When the man with the scar returned, he was carrying a small device in his hands. It was a sleek, metallic object that seemed to hum with energy. He placed it on the table in front of the diplomat and stepped back, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. "Take a look," the man said, his voice quieter now. "This is just one of many." The diplomat hesitated, his mind racing. What was this? Was this some kind of weapon? What did it do? He reached out slowly, feeling the weight of the device in his hands. As soon as his fingers made contact with it, the room seemed to hum with energy. The device began to glow faintly, and for a moment, the diplomat felt a strange sense of power radiating from it. He looked up at the humans, his eyes wide with surprise. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling with awe. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what their technology could do. "This," she said softly, "is just a taste. And if you dare to press any further, you'll find that humanity's power is far beyond anything you've ever encountered." The diplomat's heart skipped a beat. He had asked the question, but now he wasn't sure if he really wanted to know the answer. The room felt colder, the tension thicker. The humans were not just powerful, they were dangerous. He had underestimated them. And now he wasn't sure if there was any way to undo that mistake. As he sat there, staring at the glowing device, one thought echoed through his mind. Humanity was not what he had expected, and what came next would change everything. The diplomat stepped out of the meeting room, his mind racing. His thoughts were fragmented, disjointed, as if trying to catch up with the flood of new information he had just absorbed. As he walked down the sleek, metallic hallway of the Earth Embassy, the echoes of his footsteps seemed unusually loud in the silence. He tried to process what he had just learned, but the images of the human leaders' calm, assured faces, and the device they had shown him kept replaying in his mind. What had he gotten himself into? He had entered Earth with a simple mission: to discuss potential alliances, to examine the resources and technologies of this young, seemingly insignificant world. He hadn't expected to encounter anything extraordinary. Earth had always been viewed as a primitive, isolated planet, and yet, in one short meeting, he had learned that this world and its people were anything but ordinary. As the diplomat passed by a large window, he caught sight of the view outside. The Earth was beautiful, serene, a jewel of blue and green suspended in the vastness of space. For a moment, the sight of it grounded him, offering a brief reprieve from the tension and confusion swirling in his head. But then, his gaze shifted to the stars beyond. He had always thought of them as distant, cold, and impersonal, just points of light in an empty void. Now, they felt different. The galaxy no longer seemed like a vast, uncaring expanse, but a collection of fragile worlds, all teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The diplomat's thoughts returned to the humans. There was something unsettling in their eyes, something ancient in the way they spoke of their strength. It wasn't just the weapons they possessed. It was the way they wielded them, the way they seemed to understand the power they held over the galaxy. He had heard rumors, of course, tales of humanity's tenacity and resourcefulness, but he had never considered those stories to be more than exaggerated myths. Now, in the silence of the hallway, those myths felt terrifyingly real. The door to his quarters slid open, and he stepped inside, the soft hum of the automated system adjusting the temperature and lighting to his specifications. The room was minimalist, stark, with smooth surfaces and sleek furniture. A small desk sat in the corner, a window offering a view of the distant Earth. He approached the desk, feeling the weight of his mission pressing down on him. His hands hovered over a data pad, ready to compose his report for his superiors. But for the first time in his career, he hesitated. How could he explain this? How could he relay what he had witnessed without sounding like a fool, without causing panic among the leaders of the Galactic Council? He knew what he had seen was far beyond anything they could have prepared for, far beyond what anyone had predicted. His mind kept returning to the woman's words, the ones that had struck him the hardest. When we fight, we don't just survive, we conquer. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He needed to make sense of this, to understand what had just happened. But it was hard to focus, to see past the shock that still gripped him. In the span of a few minutes, his entire perception of humanity had shifted. What had once seemed like a simple assignment had now turned into a ticking time bomb. What would the galaxy do when it found out about Earth's true potential? What would the other species think, the ones who had long since considered humans beneath their notice? There was only one way to find out. The diplomat sat down at the desk, activating the datapad. His fingers moved quickly, typing out his report to the Galactic Council, trying to find the right words. He knew this would change everything. The humans were no longer just a species to be manipulated or ignored. They were a power in their own right, and the rest of the galaxy would soon have to face that reality. But as he wrote, a feeling of unease settled deep in his gut. He had come here to negotiate, to learn, to forge new alliances. Instead, he was sending a message of warning. He wasn't sure if the galaxy was ready to hear it. In fact, he was beginning to doubt whether anyone was truly prepared for the storm that was coming. Back on Earth, the human leaders were already discussing the next steps. They had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the diplomat would leave their meeting with more questions than answers. They knew how the rest of the galaxy would react to the news of Earth's newfound strength. They had expected it, prepared for it, and they were ready. The woman who had spoken earlier sat at the head of the table, her fingers steepled in front of her. She looked calm, as always, but her sharp eyes betrayed the intensity of her thoughts. The other leaders sat in silence, each one contemplating the same thing. They had shown the diplomat a small piece of what humanity could do, and now they had to consider how the galaxy would respond. "We've made our move," the woman said quietly, breaking the silence. "Now, we wait." A man with a gruff voice leaned forward, his gaze focused on her. What if the diplomat doesn't report this truthfully? What if the council thinks he's overreacting? She smiled, her expression cold and calculating. They'll know. The truth always comes out. And when it does, they'll have no choice but to face it. The man nodded grimly, his fingers tapping on the table. "We've kept our power hidden for so long. But now, it's time. Time for the galaxy to know what we're capable of." The woman's eyes glinted with something darker. "And when they know, they'll have two choices: accept us or face the consequences." She stood up, her posture straight and commanding. The galaxy has underestimated humanity for too long. It's time they learn that when we say we're a force to be reckoned with, we mean it. As the leaders filed out of the room, they shared a quiet understanding. The diplomat had left their meeting with the information they had wanted him to have. But now, the real game was about to begin. The future of the galaxy was no longer in the hands of those who had once ruled it with ease. Humanity was here to stay, and the rest of the galaxy would have to decide what to do with them. The woman took one last look at the Earth through the massive windows of the council chamber. The stars were cold, distant, but in that moment, they seemed to grow even more distant. Humanity was no longer a small, insignificant world. They had shown their strength, and now they were about to change the course of history. The diplomat's report had been only the beginning. Now, the galaxy would know the truth, and there would be no turning back. The stars outside the embassy's windows seemed to twinkle with an almost mocking gleam. The diplomat had barely finished submitting his report before he was summoned to the Galactic Council. It wasn't the usual protocol, but after everything he had learned from the humans, the urgency was palpable. The council couldn't wait any longer. As he entered the holographic chamber, the vast expanse of the galaxy stretched before him. Around him sat representatives from every major species, their faces set in unreadable masks of authority. At the center, the Supreme Chancellor awaited him, the leader of the Council, and a being who had seen and negotiated through millennia of galactic politics. "Report, Ambassador." The Chancellor's voice resonated, an unsettling mix of curiosity and stern command. The diplomat swallowed hard. His throat felt dry, and his mind raced. The enormity of the task before him was not lost on him. He had to reveal the truth, yet he knew it would change everything. The diplomat cleared his throat, standing tall as the weight of the moment pressed on him. "Esteemed members of the Council," he began, voice steady but laced with tension, "I have just returned from a diplomatic meeting with Earth's leaders. You will not believe what I encountered." He paused, watching as a ripple of interest passed through the assembled representatives. None of them had expected much from Earth. After all, they were considered primitive by galactic standards, and the species itself had been largely ignored for centuries. But things had shifted. The diplomat continued. "The humans are far more powerful than we ever anticipated," he said, his words punctuated by the gravity of the revelation. "They possess technology beyond anything we have ever seen. And not just that, there is a hidden strength within them, a resolve, a brutality in battle that we've only glimpsed in legends." The faces around the table were unreadable, but the tension in the room was palpable. The Chancellor raised a hand, silencing him. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ambassador?" the Chancellor asked, his voice betraying no emotion. But the diplomat knew better. The Chancellor's gaze held the weight of centuries of leadership, and right now, it was sharp with suspicion. The diplomat's mind raced, and he could feel the truth pressing against him, like an invisible weight. "They have weapons that could destroy fleets, not just cripple them. They demonstrated this for me. And there is something else, something worse." He let the silence stretch, knowing full well how dangerous this information was. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. This was no longer about trade agreements or power plays. This was about the balance of the galaxy itself. "Worse," the Supreme Chancellor repeated, leaning forward. "Explain yourself." The diplomat hesitated, collecting his thoughts. "It's not just the weaponry. The humans are ruthless. The device they showed me, it's not just a tool of destruction. It's a symbol of something far more terrifying. They've been at war with each other for centuries, and their capacity for violence has forged them into something different. They are not the fragile, disjointed species we thought them to be." The room fell silent. The diplomat could feel every eye in the chamber on him, pressing, probing. The other representatives exchanged glances, but none dared speak yet. The diplomat could sense the tension mounting, but he pressed on. "They believe in the supremacy of their will. They've told me that when they fight, they don't just survive, they conquer. And from what I saw, it's not a boast. It's a fact." A low murmur ran through the council as the gravity of the diplomat's words sank in. The reputation of Earth had always been one of weakness, a backwater planet. But now, that perception was shattered. Humanity was no longer just another insignificant world. It was a threat, a force to be reckoned with. The Supreme Chancellor was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving the diplomat. "So what now?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you suggesting that we prepare for war with Earth?" The diplomat swallowed, the weight of the decision now pressing heavily on him. "I'm not suggesting war, Chancellor. But I am telling you that the humans are not the weaklings you believe them to be. The truth is, they've been biding their time. And now, they've shown their hand." The council members exchanged tense looks. A few were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It was clear that this information had thrown them off balance. The idea that a species once considered insignificant could pose such a threat to the stability of the galaxy was unthinkable. Yet here they were. "This changes everything," one of the representatives said, breaking the silence. If what the ambassador says is true, then we cannot afford to underestimate them. There were whispers now, quiet murmurs of agreement and disagreement. The Supreme Chancellor stood, his towering presence commanding attention. "We must tread carefully," he said, his voice firm. "The humans are unpredictable, and their power is too great to ignore, but we cannot act rashly. The rest of the galaxy must be informed, but we must also decide what our next steps will be." He turned his gaze back to the diplomat. "You will remain here until further notice. Your report will be sent to all relevant parties in the Council. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare yourself. This information will not be taken lightly." The diplomat nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. His mission had been clear: gather intelligence, report back. But now, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he wasn't sure if humanity's revelation would lead to an alliance or an all-out war. As he left the chamber, the weight of his knowledge settled heavily on his shoulders. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been only a few hours ago. The humans had changed everything. Now, the galaxy had to decide how to respond. And soon, the rest of the galaxy would know the truth. Earth was no longer the weak, isolated world it had once been. They had weapons, they had strength, and they had a will to fight that no one had expected. The diplomat only hoped the galaxy could handle what was coming next. As the diplomat made his way back to his quarters, the corridors of the embassy felt strangely empty. The usual hustle and bustle of galactic representatives had slowed to a muted hum. The news he had just delivered weighed heavily on his mind. Yet there was no turning back now. The council had heard the truth. They would now begin to act, or perhaps react. It was difficult to tell which would come first. He reached his room and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The images of Earth's power, the ships, the technology, and most unsettling of all, the humans themselves, flashed in his mind. They were not what anyone had expected. They were far more dangerous, more capable than anyone had imagined. He could still hear the chilling words of the human president echoing in his ears. "We don't fight to survive. We fight to win." The diplomat wasn't sure what to make of it. The humans were driven by something stronger than survival. It was a primal, almost terrifying desire to conquer, to dominate, not just as individuals, but as a species. They didn't fight wars. They fought to reshape the world around them. And they had the firepower to back it up. His communicator blinked, pulling him out of his thoughts. With a sigh, he activated it, knowing what was coming. The council was ready for his next report, but this time, it wasn't just a request for details. They wanted his opinion, his analysis. This meeting would determine how to move forward, and it could change everything for both the council and Earth. The hologram flickered to life, and the faces of the council members filled the room. The Supreme Chancellor, as expected, spoke first. "Ambassador, we need to discuss your report in greater detail." The Chancellor's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "We've already begun preparing contingency plans, but we require more information. You spent time with the humans. You interacted with their leaders. What is your assessment of their motivations? Are they a true threat, or just a primitive species with dangerous toys?" The question was pointed, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. The diplomat's heart raced, but he kept his composure. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when the fate of humanity's future would be decided. He needed to be careful with his words. "Chancellor, I've seen their technology. I've seen their weapons. But it's not just that." The diplomat began slowly, choosing his words with care. "The humans are driven by something deeper. They are not a species like any other we've encountered. Their entire history is one of struggle, of conflict. They do not accept weakness, whether in themselves or others." The Supreme Chancellor leaned forward, intrigued. "And what does that mean for us?" The diplomat swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing against him. "It means that they will not hesitate to defend themselves if they feel threatened. They have no fear of us, no fear of the galactic powers. They view themselves as the dominant force in any conflict. A murmur passed through the council members. Some of them seemed skeptical, others uncertain. But none of them looked pleased. The implications of what the diplomat was saying were far-reaching, and the galaxy was not prepared to deal with the rise of such an unpredictable force. "Are you suggesting that they are prepared to go to war?" one of the representatives asked, his tone sharp. The diplomat nodded grimly. "Yes, they're not just prepared, they are eager for it." The president of Earth herself said, and I quote, "We may not have the most ships, but we have something no one else has, a willingness to fight until the last breath." The room fell silent as the weight of those words sunk in. A willingness to fight until the last breath. That was something no one had expected from a species like humanity. They were supposed to be small, insignificant, yet here they were, with a resolve that could shake the foundations of the galaxy. "We need to be very careful about how we approach this," the Supreme Chancellor said finally, his voice grave. "Their power is real, but their unpredictability is a greater danger. We cannot simply approach them as we would any other species. If we push too hard, we risk provoking something that will bring about the destruction of entire fleets. We need to assess whether it's worth negotiating with them or whether we need to prepare for war." "But if we wait too long," another representative added, "we risk underestimating them entirely. They are already capable of destroying our fleets, and who knows what else they might be hiding." The diplomat nodded, understanding the severity of the situation. "That's exactly the problem. I don't believe they're hiding anything. But they also aren't telling us everything. We saw a glimpse of their firepower, but we don't know the full extent of their capabilities. And the more we delay, the more dangerous it becomes. If they feel cornered or threatened, they might strike first." The Supreme Chancellor considered this for a long moment. "We'll need to decide quickly," he said, his voice firm. "This could be the turning point of the entire galaxy. A species like Earth's humans could alter the balance of power in ways we cannot predict." The council fell silent as they mulled over the information, each representative weighing the potential consequences of their next actions. The diplomat knew there was no turning back now. Humanity had changed the rules. The galaxy would have to adapt to them, or face the consequences. "I will prepare my next report," the diplomat said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "And I will continue to gather information. We must act, one way or another, before Earth decides that they are ready to act themselves." The holograms flickered and the meeting came to an end. As the diplomat powered down the communicator, he couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was on the brink of something far bigger than anyone could understand. Humanity's response to this meeting would be crucial. And he feared that no one, not even the most powerful forces in the galaxy, were truly ready for what was about to unfold. The stars outside the embassy's windows gleamed once more, but this time they seemed to hold an ominous promise. A promise that the galaxy would soon learn what it truly meant to face humanity's firepower. The diplomat stood at the window of his quarters, staring into the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled far off in the distance, innocent and silent, oblivious to the storm brewing in the heart of the galaxy. His mind raced, the words of the human president echoing in his thoughts. "We don't fight to survive. We fight to win." Humanity had been underestimated for far too long. They were no longer the weak, primitive species many in the galaxy had once thought them to be. The diplomat had seen firsthand just how much power Earth held. The weapons, the technology, it was all beyond anything he had ever encountered. But it wasn't just the firepower that made humanity a threat. It was their sheer will, their unyielding determination. They were ready to fight for their survival. Yes, but more than that, they were ready to fight for victory. With a sigh, the diplomat turned away from the window. The council had been unnerved by his report, and rightly so. The galaxy was accustomed to dealing with species that were either willing to negotiate or easy to crush. Humanity, however, was neither. They were not a species to be cowed by threats or promises of power. They would fight to the last, and they would fight as though they had nothing to lose. It was a mentality that made them unpredictable, dangerous, and utterly terrifying. The diplomat's communicator beeped, cutting through his thoughts. It was a message from the Supreme Chancellor. The urgency in the message was palpable. Urgent meeting. Immediate discussion required. He hesitated for a moment, then quickly made his way to the council chamber. The room was filled with the usual representatives, their faces a mix of concern and resolve. The Supreme Chancellor stood at the center, his expression somber as he awaited the diplomat's arrival. "Ambassador," the Chancellor began, "we've received new intelligence from our outer systems. The humans have been more active than we initially realized. Their ships are moving, not just in their own territory, but into systems that border ours. We believe they're testing their capabilities, pushing the boundaries of what they can do." The diplomat's heart skipped a beat. "Testing," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," the Chancellor replied. "They're moving toward our borders, not in an aggressive manner, but in a way that suggests they're probing for weaknesses. They're not launching attacks, but they're making their presence known." The implications of this were staggering. The humans weren't just standing by, waiting for the galaxy to make the first move. They were taking the initiative, showing that they had no intention of waiting around to be conquered or controlled. It was a bold statement, one that sent a shiver down the diplomat's spine. "We believe this is a show of strength," the Chancellor continued, "a signal to us that they are ready. If we do not respond appropriately, we risk provoking them." "But they haven't attacked," the diplomat said, his brow furrowing. "They're not behaving like a species about to wage war." "Not yet," the Chancellor said, his tone firm. "But that's the problem. The longer we let them move freely, the more confidence they will gain. And if they feel threatened or cornered, we have no idea what they're capable of." The diplomat's mind raced. He had to admit, the Chancellor was right. Humanity wasn't acting like a species desperate for survival. They were acting like a species that had already decided the war was theirs to win. They weren't afraid of the galaxy. They were testing its resolve. "We must make contact with them immediately," another representative spoke up, his voice filled with urgency. "We must send a message before it's too late. If they are trying to provoke us, we must show them we're not afraid." "And if they don't respond to diplomacy?" asked another, her eyes narrowing. "What then?" The Supreme Chancellor turned to the diplomat. "That is why we need you. You've seen their leaders. You've spoken with them. You know their mindset. What is your advice, Ambassador?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. The pressure was overwhelming, but the diplomat knew what had to be said. "If we confront them now, we risk escalating the situation into full-blown war. But if we do nothing, we may be handing them the upper hand. The humans thrive on challenge. They don't respond well to weakness. They only understand strength." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The diplomat had just given them a choice: face humanity head-on, or risk being swept aside by their relentless drive. Either way, there was no turning back. "We must show them that we are not afraid," the diplomat said, his voice steady. "We must prove that we are willing to fight if necessary. The galaxy may have underestimated humanity, but we cannot afford to make that mistake again." The Supreme Chancellor nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "Very well. We will send a message, and we will prepare our fleets. But remember, Ambassador, we must be careful. We are not dealing with a species that will simply fall in line. Humanity has made it clear that they are ready to take on anyone. We must decide if we are prepared for that kind of war." The diplomat stood tall, his mind still processing the magnitude of the situation. He had spent years studying the politics and power dynamics of the galaxy, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for humanity's ferocity, their strength, and their willingness to risk everything for victory. The galaxy was about to learn just how dangerous the humans truly were, and how much they were willing to fight for their place in the stars. As the meeting concluded, the diplomat couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The next move would be humanity's, and the galaxy would have no choice but to react. The following days were filled with an air of anxious anticipation. The diplomat couldn't escape the feeling that a storm was brewing, one that would engulf the entire galaxy. The message had been sent, but it was unclear how the humans would respond. Would they see the Council's show of force as a warning, or would they treat it as the beginning of a conflict? Everything depended on how the humans perceived this moment. The diplomat sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the communications he had received from Earth's leaders. He had studied the language, the tone, and the very essence of the messages. Earth was not a species that would be easily intimidated, nor would they be swayed by diplomatic niceties. They were not a race that dealt with subtlety. They were blunt, direct, and unafraid to make their intentions known. Their response had been just as expected, a straightforward declaration. We do not seek war, but we will not back down from it. We will defend ourselves, and we will win. There it was again, humanity's unshakable belief in their ability to overcome any challenge. The diplomat had never seen anything quite like it. The Council, by comparison, was full of uncertainty and hesitations. Humanity was not. They were resolute, unyielding, and utterly certain in their own power. The diplomat's communicator beeped, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from the Supreme Chancellor. The message was brief but urgent. Prepare yourself. The humans are making their move. With a heavy heart, the diplomat knew what that meant. He made his way to the council chamber, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. Every representative was there, their faces set in grim determination. The Supreme Chancellor was at the head of the table, his eyes steely as he addressed the room. "The time has come," he said, his voice low. "The humans have mobilized their forces. We do not know their full intentions, but their ships are already on the move. We've detected several fleets crossing their borders. They're moving toward neutral space, and if they continue, they will be in direct confrontation with our own forces." The room fell silent as the representatives exchanged nervous glances. It was a situation none of them had expected to face so soon. The humans were not only responding to the Council's show of strength, they were challenging it. They were making it clear that they would not back down, no matter the consequences. "We need to act fast," one representative spoke, his voice shaking with urgency. "If they move into our space, we may have no choice but to engage. If we wait too long, we risk losing control of the situation." The diplomat stood up, his heart racing. "They are not like any species we have faced before. This is not a game of diplomacy or showmanship. The humans are serious. They will not hesitate to act if they feel threatened. We cannot afford to misread them again." The Supreme Chancellor nodded gravely. "You're right. The question is, what do we do next? Do we risk escalation, or do we attempt to negotiate again?" Another representative spoke up, his tone firm. "We've already shown our strength. If we back down now, we risk looking weak. The humans will see that as an invitation to attack. We need to be resolute." The diplomat understood the gravity of the situation. The Council had already made its intentions clear, but the humans had responded with an unyielding stance of their own. There was no room for doubt now. The galaxy was at a crossroads. The choices made in the next few hours would set the course for the future. As the discussion continued, the diplomat's mind raced. What was humanity thinking? How far were they willing to go to prove their strength? The Council's forces were formidable, but the humans had something far more dangerous: a complete lack of fear. The diplomat had seen it firsthand, how they fought, how they pushed forward with a single-minded determination. The message from Earth was crystal clear. We are not here to negotiate. We are not here to back down. If you want peace, we will accept it. But if you want war, we will give it to you. The diplomat couldn't shake the feeling that the Council was walking into a trap. The humans were playing a different game, one the galaxy had yet to understand. Humanity didn't want to play by the same rules. They wanted to make their own. "We must make a decision," the Supreme Chancellor said, his voice cutting through the diplomat's thoughts. "If we don't respond now, we risk losing the initiative." The diplomat closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. There was no easy answer. If they attacked, it could trigger an all-out war. If they waited, they might give humanity the upper hand. But there was one thing that was certain. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's strength before. They couldn't afford to make that mistake again. "We need to be prepared for anything," the diplomat said, his voice steady. "The humans are not going to back down. And we shouldn't expect them to. But we must make it clear that we are not afraid either. If this escalates, we will need to show them that we are just as capable of fighting, just as ready to protect our interests." The Supreme Chancellor nodded, a stern look on his face. "Then we will prepare our forces, but we will not strike first. We will send another message, this time one that makes our stance clear. We are not afraid of war. But if it comes to that, we will be ready." The diplomat couldn't help but feel the weight of those words. The galaxy was on the brink of something far larger than anyone had anticipated. The humans had declared their readiness for war, but the question remained: would the galaxy be able to match their strength, or would it crumble beneath the weight of humanity's unrelenting will? As the meeting ended, the diplomat turned to leave, his mind heavy with the knowledge that the future of the galaxy was now in the hands of the humans. The stars outside his window seemed to hold a strange, foreboding promise. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same.